So this Torah portion I really love. There's all these interesting nuggets that Annette pointed out about what's in this parasha, but I chose to read from the very end, from chapter 15, because I've always found it to be very meaningful. And I find it very interesting to learn about the notion of the remission of debts and what that means every 7 years. The law, which is intended as a protection for the poor, so it allows poor to escape eternal debt, servitude. In reality, it was quite difficult for the poor. And in many times, the poor were sometimes hurt by this law because of those who were the lenders were not willing to actually follow the parameters that the Torah sets out. And the Torah actually warns against this. In verse 9, God rebukes us in advance, which is kind of interesting. I'm going to give you this law, and by the way, I know you're not going to follow it, so this is why you need to follow it. God says, "Beware lest you harbor the base thought, the 7th year, the year of remission, is approaching, so that you are mean to your needy kinsman and give him nothing. He will cry out to the Lord against you, and you will incur guilt." So this idea that every 7 years the debts go away, they're forgiven. People, when that came close to the 7th year, didn't really want to lend any money because they knew they wouldn't be repaid. So as time went on, the rabbis realized there was a problem. We have a commandment. The people aren't fulfilling. They're going against it. And who's getting hurt the most? The poor. Because they need the loan to live, and they can't get any loans. So the rabbis were stuck in this terrible predicament. The lending markets were completely stalled. No one was being well served by this law. So a creative solution came about. You might have heard of this. Rabbi Hillel made this incredible, beautiful Jewish legal loophole called the Prose Bowl, which was a document that would accompany a loan and state that the loan would be transferred to the court. That would make the debt public, kind of like public domain, and thus wouldn't be required to be released in the 7th year, because the public debts don't carry the same rules as the private individual debts. So this Prose Bowl, this legal idea, benefited the borrowers and the lenders. The borrowers had access to the loan. The lenders knew their money was safe. And while this might seem like it's really benefiting the wealthy to get their loans repaid, it was a way to encourage people to continue to support the poor, to make sure that the poor had what they needed. So it's very interesting, and we see this a lot with Torah, with Judaism, that things evolve. We have Torah as our base, and we have the mitzvot, which we observe, but the way in which they're observed in biblical times changes to rabbinic times and changes in many ways to modern times. So I think looking at this chapter of Deuteronomy, it begs the question, if the practicality of the observance has been transformed to something different, can the ideals behind them continue to be observed in a serious way? So to do that, and I think the answer is yes, that was a straw man, I want to focus on the word ach, which means what? Brother. Ach. Like achim, shevet achim, gam yachad. We sit as brothers together. It's used over and over again in this parasha, especially in chapter 15. It comes 6 times within this chapter. Repeatedly, the Torah lays out the laws aimed at alleviating the sufferings of the poor, and the poor are referred to as brothers, achim, but not just as brothers, but as achecha, as your brothers. In part, the word ach, brother, distinguishes the members of the community from outsiders, which is a difficult idea, and that's another sermon. But the constant invocation of brotherhood, I think, points to a particular direction, that it indicates an emphasis on relationship, that those with whom one lives as brothers and sisters always have a claim on our compassion. when that term brother is used, you cannot ignore. There cannot be negligence. There's a Bible scholar, an academic named Walter Houston, who explains that Deuteronomy as a whole intends to depict the relationship between members of the national community as if it were an extended family or clan. And we think about this even in modern parlance. We talk about Jews as being members of the tribe, the sense that we are connected more deeply as family than just having a shared religion. That brothers, whatever the degree of blood relationship, should genuinely act as brothers. That is, with generosity and not hard-heartedness. So why does that matter today, besides that it's nice to think of each other as brothers and sisters? Because it's very easy for people to imagine that socioeconomic inequality points to some deep metaphysical, perhaps, inequality, as if the rich were in some way more important than the poor. We know that's not true, but sometimes that happens. The Torah tells us, demands of us to remember that socioeconomic status tells us nothing about the worth of people. It reminds us that really we are all brothers and sisters. And so it's kind of a simple but radical claim that the plight of the poor is our responsibility. That if we are a society that is filled with holiness, that that an economic second class is intolerable to God. To be sure, it's hard to think about how the ideas of Shemitah that we read about the seventh year, which is agricultural in many ways, takes us into modern times. But I think that we can see that the ideals of Torah in this parasha are teaching us an imperative to build a society in which the poor are seen as equal, to work to ensure that entrenched poverty doesn't rob people of the dignity of opportunity. That Deuteronomy makes clear to us that a society truly committed to seeing one another as brothers and sisters, as extended family, that is a society in which we can alleviate the suffering of those ravaged by poverty. That is a society worthy of God's blessing. Shabbat Shalom.